Hello, everyone, and welcome to Using ePRO with Smart Devices, a case study presented by Roe. I'm Rebecca Friend, the publisher of Fierce Markets Life Sciences Publications, and I'll be moderating this webinar. Our speakers today are Emily Cantrell, Senior Director of Operations at Roe, and Emily Baggett, Senior Project Manager at Roe. You can read their full bios on the right side of your window. We've got just a few technical notes for you before we begin. If you have any trouble reading a slide, please hold and drag the right corner of the slide window to enlarge. Please also disable your pop-up blockers to participate in the interactive parts of the presentation. If you'd like to download the slide deck, please click the purple globe at the bottom of your screen. This webinar will be recorded, and it will be available for on-demand viewing within 24 hours after this event. We're going to be following the presentations with a Q&A session, so please submit your questions during or after the presentations using that Q&A box at the right side of your screen. All right, I think that's everything from me. Emily, please go ahead.
All right, thanks so much, Rebecca, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Today, Becky and I will be sharing our recent experiences using ePRO on a study, and we'd like to point out just a few things for you to take into consideration. We would like to mention that this webinar is not intended to discuss any specific vendors or our recommendations, but rather discuss our experiences and provide the viewers points of consideration for using ePRO. We are not promoting any particular solution, but rather sharing considerations that are relevant regardless of the provider you select. During this presentation, we will discuss how to integrate ePRO into your study startup process. Additionally, we will provide you with some site considerations, beginning with the SQV process. Just to point out, the link here at the bottom of this slide is a reference for FDA's guidance for all patient-reported outcomes that is very helpful to review. This document also contains a section that's related specifically to ePROs as well. The recent study Becky and I worked on was a large Phase 3 pain study across 40 sites. All of these sites were in the United States and participated in competitive enrollment. This study included a large number of assessments, one of which was the study's primary endpoint. At this time, we needed to consider whether to use paper versus ePRO. We decided to move forward with the ePRO choice for this particular study. This study used an e-tablet that was kept on-site and utilized during visits by both the site staff and subjects. How do you know if ePRO is the right choice for your study? We'll outline a few items of points that you will want to consider. One item is, will the data be analyzed for a study endpoint? As in our case, it was. This definitely helped with our decision-making process. You will also want to weigh the risks and benefits of using ePRO. ePRO can be very expensive and time-consuming. However, the data is entered directly by the subject and then calculated by the tablet. This can introduce less room for human error and possible inconsistencies in the data. On the other hand, paper is less expensive. However, it requires a great deal of paper printing. In this case, data may be inconsistently measured at different sites or even at the same site by a different staff member. If you have a vast scale in one of your assessments, printing or photocopying may also alter the measurement. You will also want to review the size and scope of your study. For example, a small Phase 2 study with 50 subjects and one questionnaire may not see the benefits from using ePRO. On the other hand, as in our case, with a large Phase 3 study with multiple questionnaires and several subjects, it proves to be very beneficial. One other thing you will want to consider is that if you plan for subjects to take devices home, you will want to consider the added complexity to your study. Once you've made the decision to move forward with ePRO, you will want to ask for referrals. If you've never worked with a vendor, please ask. We realize that this is definitely the way to go. In our experience, we reached out to several sites for which we have worked with before and have developed great relationships with. We sought their input and we found their feedback extremely helpful. At Roe, our policy is only to partner or contract with a vendor if our QA department has performed a qualification visit with them. Please remember that your auditor who's going out to perform this audit should be familiar with requirements for CFR 21 Part 11 compliance. Next, Becky's going to talk to you a bit about the validation process.
Thanks, Emily. There's two types of validation that we'll discuss. the systems and software validation, which is the most well-known, and equivalence validation, which we'll discuss in more detail. But just to quickly touch on the systems validation piece, as with your EDC system, the devices, their software, and related functionality will need to be validated. The article linked here has additional information about what is involved with validation, but the basic elements are listed here on this slide. The process for validation for the devices should be provided to you in written documentation. The FDA guidance on equivalence validation is very vague as to whether or not it is needed. For our study, which was a pivotal phase 3, where the primary endpoint was captured on the tablet in pursuit of marketing claims, we decided to conduct the equivalence validation. So what's the process? Equivalence studies will need to be conducted to evaluate whether subjects will view the paper PROs equal to the ePRO. A scaled-down version of your study will be conducted typically through a third-party vendor. The vendor will need to recruit patients who will meet the major inclusion and exclusion criteria so they mimic your study population. They will present the subjects with both paper and electronic versions of the patient-reported outcomes. Subjects will be asked if they interpreted or answered the questions differently between the two options. Results from the study will be presented to you in a report. A few good questions to ask the vendor are, when will the study begin? How do they plan to find the subjects? You'll want to review their plan for study startup. Where will the equivalence study occur? In our particular case, the vendor, which was located in the UK, let us know that they were planning to conduct this evaluation in the UK. We decided to have it moved to the US so that it would more accurately reflect our patient population. Some items to consider with the validation process is that it can be very costly and time-consuming. You're going to want to ask the ePRO vendor what options are available. Do they have forms that have gone through this validation process before that you could use? This can significantly reduce the cost and time involved. If you're using PROs that have licensing fees, you will need to ensure who will be responsible for obtaining those estimates and the licenses, and incorporate that time into your budget and timeline. Try to determine early on if you're going to perform validation to ensure you have adequate time to still meet your first patient in. Those performing the validation will need to find the appropriate subject population that closely matches your inclusion and exclusion criteria. You'll need to account for time for the validation, the interview process, the writing and review of the results. If differing feedback is received from the subjects participating in the validation, a decision will need to be made if any changes are required, or if another validation should be performed. Both of these options will add time and cost. Some findings could affect your protocol. In the case of our study, some of the subjects stated that the order in which the questionnaires were presented was confusing. This caused us to reorder them on the tablet, which increased the time and also the cost, and we did incur a change in scope. To talk more about the scope of work, I'm going to hand it back over to Emily.
Thanks, Becky. So, as we all know, during study startup, it can be extremely difficult to carve out time to perform all of the tasks that we need to do during this time frame. It's very important that we perform a thorough review of all of the necessary documents included in the scope of work. We feel like this is a critical piece for the project, and we want to ensure that we ask lots of questions. For the validation piece, you want to ensure that the equivalence validation is included in your scope of work, and if not, ask for a cost estimate for that. For UAT, how many rounds are included in your scope of work? For the site manuals, who will create these and who will finalize these to be distributed to the sites? For training, you will want to ensure that you have ample time to train the CRO, the sponsor, and be present at the investigator meeting to train the staff. Finally, you will want to know if you will be renting or purchasing all of the equipment that's available from the vendor. You'll also want to consider how many help desk calls are included in the budget. You will find that these can be rather expensive and add up quickly. You'll want to know if the tablets are going to be scheduled to go through any software updates during the time frame of your study's enrollment period and how this may impact your study. Are there adequate hours built into the budget for project management involvement? The time is extremely intensive during study startup for these hours. What's included with the hardware? You'll want to take note that you have extra tablets and equipment for the sponsor, the CRO, any client support services groups that you may be using, and possibly if one breaks. You'll want to know if the tablet is going to go through any updates or release a new version during the time in which you will be using them. If so, how will this impact your study as well? You'll want to know what backup accessories are included. This includes possible items such as a stylus, cords, a stand, and cleaning cloths, etc. And what are the wireless connection options? If you have spotty wireless connection at sites, you may need to provide Wi-Fi or MiFi devices, which can also incur additional costs. During study startup, it's important to not only understand what is included in your scope of work, but also when the following will occur. You'll want to understand the timing of when input from you or your team is due. This piece is critical, especially during study startup. It will help you ensure that you meet your desired timelines. You'll also want to know if your timelines include ample time for translations if applicable, and who will be responsible for translating the questionnaires. Be sure to ask when you will receive documents and when UAT is scheduled. Get some dates from the vendor and make sure you get those on your calendar. How many rounds are included with this also? You'll want to ensure you have your data manager and/or programmer review test data transfers once available. This will help you evaluate the data structure and integration complexity with the CRF data. What type of training is included in your scope of work? What is the recommended process for site initiation? And finally, do they have a list of requirements or preferences for optimal performance at the site? Now that you understand a little bit about your scope of work and the events during study startup, let's dive next into UAT. I'll turn it over to Becky to talk a little bit about this.
UAT is an extremely important part of the startup process. You're going to want to make sure that you have the right stakeholders involved in the UAT. It's going to take a cross-functional effort between the CRO, the sponsor, and the ePRO vendor. For our particular study, we decided to have a face-to-face meeting. The sponsor, RO, and the ePRO vendor were all in the same room. We tested independently, but if an issue was found, we were able to discuss it immediately, evaluate what needed to be done in order to fix the issue, and this is extremely helpful and saved us a lot of time. You'll want to include the person who is most familiar with the specifications, and this could be your project manager, but you'll also want to include clinical, data management, and if you're using your own client support group, they'll need to be included as well. You could even include someone with minimal knowledge about the study design and questionnaires to get an additional opinion, someone who would most represent the experience of the subject. Part of your UAT should include the web interface. This web interface should be easy to view the data, user-friendly, and has data reporting capabilities. The vendor will provide you with a script in order to follow for UAT. You should always try as many different scenarios as you can think of outside of the provided script. Try to break the system. Remember, the sites and subjects won't have a script, so any potential issues that you can address now is most beneficial. Not every finding during UAT is critical, but you need to decide which ones are critical enough to impact the data and make the necessary changes. Plan for some flexibility in your UAT timeline, as changes are a high probability after the first round. Depending on the complexity of the change, the programming and validation can take a while. Make sure that all appropriate documentation is also updated to reflect the changes. One tip is to include a buffer for programming changes in your timeline after the first round of UAT. There are some considerations for the impact on your budget. Data imports and exports, for example. How will you receive the data from the vendor? They can deliver it to you, or will you extract it from their web interface? Understand their DCF process from queries. What's involved? If you're responsible for data management, make sure to include time for the ePRO DCF process in your query or site management hourly assumptions. What will be the process for incorporating paper backups? If you are using paper backup questionnaires and diaries, how will they be incorporated into the rest of the electronic data? Next, I'm going to switch it back over to Emily for site considerations.
Okay, thanks. At Roe, we perform an initial feasibility with sites to gauge their interest for participating in studies, and we do this through an online survey. During this time, we like to ask sites if they've worked with ePRO tablets. We like to ask them if they have any recommendations. These questions will also highlight the site's experience with using ePRO. We'll ask about their internet capabilities and what storage facilities they have to house the equipment. This will also be very helpful for site selection to ensure that we are choosing the best sites to fit our projects. At the qualification visit stage, you will want to reconfirm site staff experience. Ask, does the site have experience with using ePRO and or the selected vendor? Do they have any previous issues or positive feedback they can relay? Although these questions may seem redundant in the pre-feasibility, it's always good to ask these questions once again. Is all site staff comfortable with technology? If not, you'll want to note they need extra training and make consideration as to whether or not they are a good fit for your study moving forward. You also want to make sure that the site can store the devices where a power source is available. If the device runs out of power, it can lose data. You'll want to know how the site handles power outages. Do they have a backup? Do they have a generator? And are the tablets in a secure location? During the site initiation visit, you'll want to address these following items with the site. For paper backups, when you are using an ePRO, it is extremely important to only use paper backups if the tablet is absolutely not working. In our situation, we asked sites to make a call to the help desk to ensure that the tablet was not working. We worked out a system where it was absolutely the last resort to use paper backups. A few things to note if you have to use paper backups are: never make copies of backups at sites. These must be requested from the CRO or sponsor. The reason for this is that photocopying can alter scales such as the VAS, which we mentioned earlier. If the scales are altered, this could add variability to measurements. Also, it's important to note that everyone has their own unique PIN code. This includes the PI, the study staff, and each individual subject. These may not be shared with anyone throughout the course of the study. Also confirm internet access. Is there a need for a MiFi or a Wi-Fi? As mentioned earlier, these can also be shipped to the site if they're in need of this. It's a good idea for the CRA to confirm the process for where the tablets and equipment will be stored during the SIV. It's also a great idea to review the physical space on site during the visit and document this in the trip report. I just want to reiterate the importance of PIN codes and understanding the compliance around this. Under no circumstances should anyone ever share passwords or PIN codes. This actually violates 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. An audit trail could actually be used to help detect inappropriate PIN code use if you suspect this is happening.
So we had many lessons learned on our study, most of which are incorporated in this presentation, but we'd like to go and review the take-home messages from this presentation. First, ask for references. If you have friendly relationships with sites, you want to make sure to check with them. They have the real-world experience. Review the devices that will be used for the study prior to their shipment to the sites. Are they the same ones that you ordered? Are they the same ones that UAT was conducted on? Are they the same ones used for your validation? If not, prices may be different. The view may be different. It's important to understand you'll be receiving the same devices that you originally ordered and tested. Get involved with the UAT training. I cannot stress this enough. It's very important for you to be involved in the UAT and to involve a cross-functional team. It's the perfect opportunity for you to seize the device and what issues may arise.
We realize the importance of incorporating hands-on training at the investigator meeting for all sites. Although sites will be trained at their site initiation visit, there are so many other items to be covered at this important visit. So it is imperative that this is a review by the time the SIV occurs. Sites and CRAs should get their hands on these devices before they go live at the sites. A webinar training or training manual will not be sufficient. In our case, we actually had the vendor come to our investigator meeting to do a training, and we had the tablets set up so that sites could come and review the tablets during this time. You want to confirm your help desk escalation early on in the process. As mentioned earlier, help desk calls from vendors can be a bit pricey. Because there can be a lot of calls from sites, especially early on in the study, Roe decided to have its Client Support Services group become the first line for questions. Our Client Support Services team was trained on the tablets and could answer most questions. For those items that could not be answered, such as changing PIN codes or programming issue, the caller was directed to the vendor's help desk. You will want to be sure that you take time changes into consideration, such as daylight savings time and standard time. Our study spanned across the course of 4 time changes. During the first time change, we realized the timestamps did not match up with the source that was provided by the site. We received a memo from the vendor which explained the discrepancies and ensured we thought about this for future time changes throughout the course of the study. Where possible, it's great to bring a device on site to the SQV to test connectivity. You can also review the site staff's comfort level and view the space where they intend to house the equipment. You'll want to ensure that you receive regular status reports. This will help you identify any potential trends or issues that may be addressed. If you notice trends across sites, it's very easy to look across the study to ensure there are no items that need to be addressed and modified. And finally, review your bid carefully to ensure that you understand everything that is included. Please don't be afraid to ask questions. Study startup is such a frenetic time, but it's worth slowing down and asking questions. You want to ensure that all you expect is included in the bid. As an example, the equivalence validation process was not originally included in our scope of work, and it became quite a significant change in scope. Thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us. We certainly hope you have found some of this information helpful, and we'd like to take a few minutes to answer some questions that you have submitted during the course of the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you for those presentations. Really nice. Now it's time to move on to Q&A. And we've got a lot of great questions, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So here's the first question for either of you. Can a validation study be done as part of an earlier Phase 1 or Phase 2 study?
Hi, yes, thanks. That's actually a great question. It certainly can be. As mentioned earlier, the guidance that's provided by the FDA is somewhat vague as to whether or not it's a requirement. I would certainly recommend that you make the decision closely with the sponsor to see if that's something that they would like to do the that particular validation in a phase 1 or phase 2 study.
Okay, great. Here's another question for you. What would added complexities be if subjects took the devices home with them?
That's also a great question as well. There would be several points to consider with this option. You would incur extra tablets that would need to be provided for all of the subjects as well as the equipment that would go along with that. The staff would need additional time at the sites to train subjects on using the tablets. This would also incur an additional cost because you would have the extra tablets. You may even have some sites that would ask for additional funds for the time that it would take to train their subjects. There's also the risk for not necessarily knowing how subjects will handle the tablets at their home. And they may not remember to enter data, which would lead to missing data that you would need to figure out how to handle later on in the study.
Okay, great. Here's another question for you. How does Roe go about choosing an ePRO vendor?
That's a great question, too. You know, as mentioned earlier, Roe does really rely heavily on past experience with its vendors and referrals from industry colleagues. While pricing is definitely part of the decision-making process, the biggest issue here is that we want to ensure the selected vendor is able to meet the needs of the study, and that's exactly what we did for this particular study.
Okay, great. And here's one more question. I think we have time for a couple more. Here we go. What's the typical timeline for ePRO?
I would suggest planning on approximately 4 months for the timeline. In our case, this allowed for time for setup, validation with the test group, UAT, any changes that needed to occur as a result of UAT, translations if you have any, which will also need to be approved by your IRB, and then, of course, shipment of the tablets to sites to be there in time for first patient in.
Okay, great. And I think that is all the time that we have. I want to thank everyone for submitting so many great questions. I also want to thank our presenters for presenting. And I want to thank Roe for sponsoring today's webinar. The webinar has been recorded. You'll be able to access the recording within 24 hours on the same page that you used to register for the event. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.